In 1995, Cartoon Network had an animation block titled What a Cartoon, which launched some of their most iconic shows, but then eventually it was changed to being titled Cartoon Cartoons, aka the Cartoon Show, which would post shorts based on creative-driven ideas that would later become full series, with some shows being made from these shorts being Samurai Jack, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Grim and Evil, Generator Rex, Ben 10, and even more. But eventually, Cartoons would more or less stop being a thing. It would still every now and again get a new pilot episode that would release, and some of them would be picked up and become a full series, such as Infinity Train and Over the Garden Wall, but sadly, a lot of them would never get a full series and would end up being completely forgotten about, with pilots such as Trick Moon, Splitting Time, and many more. And whilst I do plan to make a video covering all of those eventually, Cartoons has now made yet another comeback, as they are now posting a new pilot for a cartoon every single Monday. Cartoon Network has kind of been in a pretty weird place, and or as what most people would say, pretty dead, as they just haven't been releasing many new original shows lately, or really any whatsoever, with the only exception being Ianu, which actually did get picked up for a season 2 in good news. But besides that, Cartoon Network has mostly been releasing revivals of already previously established popular IPs, bringing back Adventure Time with Fiona and Cake and side quests also on the way, bringing back Gumball with the wonderfully rewritten Gumball, which has 2 more seasons on the way, bringing back Steven Universe with Lars of the Stars coming soon, and even Regular Show with what will supposedly be titled Regular Show The Lost Tapes. These series are heavy hitters. They have such vast amounts of different characters and stories to tell with them, and for that, it of course makes sense for them to focus on them over getting something new, as they definitely have already struck in gold. But when you almost only rely on that gold, of course people will begin to want something new. So with that, it's actually just great to see them now hopefully aiming to get at least one new show, if not multiple, and even more so just with the fact that they are doing so by bringing back Cartoons. Whilst it is good for the audience, it's even better for the pilot creators and the people who worked on them, as most of these pilots were first revealed all the way back in 2021 after it was first announced that Cartoons would be returning, before then obviously just stopped being discussed whatsoever and made seem would never be seeing the light of day. But now they are finally out, and not only is it just good for animation in general as a whole, they all are just actually well animated, with pretty much a different unique style in every one that just really defines the vibe it's going for in the most creatively artistic ways. The first pilot that released is created by Chime Mara and titled A for Angel. A for Angel follows a devil student at a devil school named Clementine, who doesn't really feel like a devil despite being one. Her teacher tries to tell her that she's just a late bloomer, but then right after this, a light shines on a set of stairs in front of her, which then leads her to the School of the Angels, where we then meet an angel who doesn't really act like an angel named Radiant, who Clementine, once told to take a test in order to join the angel school, goes with to kind of also give her an opportunity to learn how to be more of an angel. The test itself being to help an actual human girl in the real world deal with a moral dilemma that she's going through, as we then see the two more or less become the angel and devil on her shoulders. But of course in this case, the rules of the two are kind of reversed. Clementine and Radiant end up fighting how to help the girl and fix her problem, but eventually through kind of getting to know each other and understanding each other unlike anyone else they know has and or has ever really tried to, they come to an equal agreement of how to respond to and or fix the girl's problem, which then actually does manage to do exactly that, which then gives them both an A+ on the assignment and allows Clementine to, despite being a devil, officially join the School of the Angels. The concept of this is pretty interesting. I feel like if this was to be given a full series, they could really dive into a bunch of other deep topics and have a bunch of conversations and arguments about what is morally right and or wrong, which honestly we need a cartoon about. But also the character designs are also super good. They're definitely marketable, but they are also just very fitting to their personalities, which definitely are also what make this pilot so good, as they are actually just super funny to see bounce off off of each other. But anyways, the next new cartoon pilot that was released is titled Accordions, Geoffrey, and Mary Melodica, which is created by Louis Zong, who is actually a pretty well-known animator on YouTube who has even previously won an Emmy Award. He has also previously uploaded the short animation test that showcased that he was working on this and or wanted to make it into a full cartoon throughout the years. And so now for a final and or more well-animated version to be released, it's definitely a treat for fans of his, but also for himself and new viewers as well. The pilot follows a girl named Mary Melodica, who after being told by some other kids at a playground that her melodica is dumb, goes to tell her grandpa named Accordions Geoffrey in hopes that he would help her out. But then after hearing this, he says that he has a plan and takes her into this creepy dungeon, almost making it seem like he was going to get something that killed them. But then we just see Mary now with this comedically massive melodica, which she then uses to prove that they aren't dumb. And this she manages to do, and through this even gets invited to join their band, as we then end the pilot with them all just playing this beautiful, almost Animal Crossing sounding tune. It's super short, but the animation of this is great. I also love that they just tell this super cute story with no words whatsoever, as they all just talk through playing music. It's a very unique approach to storytelling that really just works alongside its animation. They definitely play off of each other really well. But anyways, now onto the next new pilot that was released, which is created by Ben Cruz and Jacob Sluka, titled Afternoon Super. The pilot follows a boy named Sean Special and his group of friends who all have superpowers, whilst on the other hand he doesn't. But Sean then reveals that there is a villain known as the Games Master that basically just makes them all solve puzzles. But of course this then makes him show up and give them their puzzle of the day, which is to reach the top of a tower filled with a bunch of puzzles and also save their friend, who he just somehow kidnaps and puts on top instantly. But nonetheless, all of Sean's friends then showcase their powers, but as Sean's about to say something despite not having one, he almost gets killed, and so the one with super strength moves him out of the way before then just reminding him of the fact that he has none. And of course this then makes Sean feel like he isn't good for anything besides solving puzzles, and now wants to prove to his friends and or to himself that he can be useful in other ways. And so he runs home to grab his supposed secret weapon, but then of course once returning, all of his friends had already defeated the enemy. But regardless, they then head inside of the tower, where they are then given a puzzle to solve. But as Sean sees that instead of doing that he can do a combat challenge, of course he chooses to do that. But we then actually see that Sean truly isn't just useful for solving puzzles and can also kick butt despite not having any powers. But we then also see that his friends kind of are just useful for fighting, as they aren't smart like Sean and just burn the puzzle to the ground. But this then of course upsets the Games Master, and so he throws all of them in jail. But this then makes Sean begin to blame himself and think that he should have just done the puzzle, and so tells his friends that it's okay if they continue to sideline him from the action. But they then say that they only sidelined him before not because he doesn't have powers and or think that he can't fight, but because they just actually need him for the puzzles, even declaring him as the most important member of their team because of it, which was pretty wholesome. They then confront the Games Master once again, and he tries to get him to fight him as he grows massive, but they just choose to completely ignore him and save their friend before escaping, which was pretty funny. But this then makes the Games Master just explode, and the tower to also explode as the camera pans out, kind of making it seem like this was just one level to a game and or just one of many bosses, so to say, in their world. But nonetheless, we then end the pilot as the group all heads home, saying that they have homework to work on. So I wonder if the Games Master, if he isn't dead, is actually possibly one of their teachers in their school, and what they did in this episode was a test of sorts. Maybe the two are completely unrelated and they actually just go to a normal school, but I feel like that concept would be pretty interesting. This is probably my favorite pilot out of all of the ones that have released yet, and or just one of my favorite pilots that come out of cartoons ever. The art direction reminds me heavily of OKKO Let's Be Heroes. The video game aesthetic and or references remind me heavily of Baldi's Basics and Mario, and the childish and yet really deep themes of it I think would generally make this a perfect watch for kids, teens, and even adults. So I really hope that this one does get greenlit, as it truly deserves to be. But now moving on to the next pilot that was released, which is created by James Burks and actually movie is based off of a graphic novel series he made all the way back in 2012, being titled Bird and Squirrel. The pilot follows a bird who goes over to his best friend Squirrel's house as he asks him for his help to clean his bike, but upon getting there, all the bird wants to do is take the bike for a ride, which at first he says they could do, but then we transition to this simple drawing animation style as he describes the hypothetical scenarios in his mind that would happen if they did, which showcase that him and the bird are pretty much polar opposites, having one super adventurous crazy character and then just an insanely scared character, and seeing how they kind of bounce off of each other's dynamics is always pretty fun. And for this pilot, I can definitely say the same, as after Squirrel's bike gets stolen, they go to investigate people around their town, whilst Bird just tells them to follow the tracks that will clearly lead to it, which was pretty funny. But then as they begin the journey through the forest, which I also want to add is actually beautiful looking, they manage to find the bike, but as Squirrel questioned why someone would even put it here, of course Bird then reveals that he did so they could ride it back home. And at first Squirrel is of course opposed to this, but as Bird brings up that apparently they went sailing before and almost died, but that they didn't, so they should do this, it somehow actually convinces him to do it. And so they then just go on this awesomely animated bike ride whilst a monster chases them, jumping over cliffs whilst electricity almost strikes them, and then even a ravine which they just barely make it to the other side of. But once they're safe, Bird apologizes to Squirrel for getting him into that situation, but Squirrel then just completely changes and says that he can't wait to ride it again tomorrow, as Bird now becomes the scared one. If this was greenlit for a full series, we could see them go on a bunch of different dangerous adventures where they almost die but don't, just like this one, or we could even see that sailing adventure they mentioned earlier. And with that, we could also continue to see how bad and yet also good of an influence Bird is on Squirrel, or even vice versa, and probably get a lot of deep, meaningful conversations between them through that. Also, the animation style and colors of this are also just great. It almost feels like more of a show that would be on Nickelodeon rather than Cartoon Network to me, but I definitely wouldn't mind it being on Cartoon Network. But anyways, the next pilot that released is created by Fernando Puig and is titled Buttons Gamezone. It follows this old rat named Buttons, who is the mascot and owner of this arcade that either is failing because it previously reached its peak and now has just kind of fallen off, or just because nobody wants to go to Buttons as there's other arcades to go to. But whatever the case, it's super run down now, and so Buttons asks who appears to be the only person working there, the manager named Cherry, if she can help him clean the insides of the pipe maze, which he also mentions is the backbone of the arcade, and this will be pretty important later. But as they head inside of the maze, we see that it's just massive and filled with a bunch of these ticket worms and other monsters, but also then that Buttons is actually just terrible at taking care of this place, and or is just kind of stupid. So as they go through and try to fix it up, we continue to see him mess up, and it resulting in Cherry getting hurt and even more mad with each altercation. And so then when they actually do finish cleaning, and it's made clear that Buttons doesn't know how to leave, but also is not willing to admit that they're lost, of course finally just results in Cherry to snap on him. And this at first makes Buttons sad, but then he actually just starts to clap back at her as they both just transform into these red grotesque monsters, which I think is always such a creative way to animate and showcase anger in general in a cartoon. But anyways, as Cherry leaves, Buttons then sees one less bandage to remove from the wall, which of course then when peeling off just makes the entire thing begin to crack. And so since Buttons was going to be crushed, Cherry of course runs back to save him, which then gives the two a pretty wholesome moment, showing that they truly do care for one another. But regardless, as Cherry says that they're still lost, Buttons then just completely destroys the entire maze, which then because of this just destroys the entire building.
The pipe maze is the backbone of the entire arcade!
This is definitely another one of my favorite pilots to ever come out of cartoons, but also is probably the most wanted to become a full series out of all of the ones I've discussed in this video, as its art style just fully encapsulates that 2000s to 2010s Cartoon Network style, clearly referencing and or taking inspiration from shows such as Uncle Grandpa, Chowder, and Flapjack, whilst also feeling very similar to early day SpongeBob episodes, and overall bringing forth the nostalgia of 90s arcades, or more specifically Chuck E. Cheese. There's definitely a lot of things to compare this to, but there's also just so much originality within it as well. And I think the overall blend of that just gives this so much potential to be one of their most popular shows. But now onto the most recently released pilot, which is created by Lavan Jahanian and titled Dang, It's Dracula. The pilot follows this version of Dracula who tries to rule over this village of people on this futuristic planet, who does so whilst appearing to actually be pretty powerful, but also as if seemingly he doesn't use his full power or is kind of unserious about everything, as well as just super emotionally unstable, as when he sees the villagers have a bunch of capes, he gets completely distracted from his actual plan and starts acting extremely whiny and jealous of them. As a character, his dialect feels very similar to Lemongrab from Adventure Time, and humor wise it also feels very similar to Rick and Morty almost, which I just don't really think works in this case, as well as kind of makes the conversations feel really dry in my opinion. But anyways, as Dracula goes into his castle, which actually does visually look pretty cool, his butler starts to sing about how great he is to cheer him up in just an actual full-length song that isn't really good or bad, but either way I definitely wasn't expecting it. But if we get a full series and they have songs in every episode, I feel like that would be very beneficial to making the episodes better, as at least to me the plot of this isn't that interesting. But nonetheless, Dracula then shows up to the village with his new cape, but then as he sees that all of the townsfolk already quit using capes and have moved on to wearing these shiny hats, they at first make it seem as if he would start being whiny again and want a hat for himself, but then instead he just says nah and tells them to get in his murder cage, which actually was pretty funny.
No, I'm good, thanks. Why don't you guys all go ahead and get into that murder cage?
But overall, this is probably my least favorite pilot out of all of the ones that have released so far. The art direction with the planet and his castle, as well as all of the character designs, are all super cool. But once again, the plot itself and the personalities of the characters, or more specifically their humor, just is not that great in my opinion. But I can still see why it would appeal to others. I'm not sure how many new pilots they plan to release, but I would assume there will at least be a few more that do. So definitely be on the lookout for those when they do, but be sure to go check out all of the pilots that have already released for yourself if you haven't already. They all are good and or at least worth giving a watch. Hopefully at least one or two of them does actually end up getting greenlit for a full series. They all should be, and I wish they all would be, but obviously that's pretty unlikely to happen. Regardless, let me know what you think about all of these new cartoons, and if I should cover any new ones that release in the future in the comments below. As with that said, that is going to be the end of the video, so consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see y'all in the next one, whenever that is.